Music Not Diving is brought to you by Acid Nation. What is Acid Nation? Well, it's a direct-to-consumer platform, a D2C platform, as we say in the business. So if you're selling music as an artist or as a label, or if you're just a music fan wanting to connect more directly with your favorite music people, well then this is absolutely the place for you. Acid Nation does quite a bit more than your average D2C platform in terms of additional services. They have their own pressing plant, so they can fulfill your vinyl orders on demand, straight from the customer to the plant, all the way back to the customer. You have to do anything, pretty amazing. They also have a streaming service, which is completely unlike any other streaming service in that they pay 1 cent per stream, a straight payment, not pro rata, just a payment of 1 cent per stream on everything that you get from that streaming service. So pretty amazing, completely unprecedented, pretty unlike anything else in this space. And so Acid Nation, like I said, they're doing some great stuff. We use them for Hot Flush recordings. We couldn't recommend them highly enough. So head over to acidnation.com to check them out.
This is Music Not Diving with Scuba.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scuba. This is Music Not Diving. Okay, we're talking Sabres of Paradise on the show this week. The storied electronic / dance / hip hop / various kinds of other stuff act, which came to prominence in, I suppose, the early to mid 90s, which was helmed and, I suppose, fronted by the late, great Andrew Weatherall. However, was co-founded by our guest this week, Jagz Kooner. Jagz is a extremely important engineer and producer in the history of dance music. I say engineer because that's kind of like how I see him, and I actually asked him about that in the course of this conversation, and he very much sees himself more as a producer. But we talk about, I suppose, the difference and the kind of similarities between those two roles in the conversation. And Jagz is a fascinating guy, done all kinds of stuff additionally to the Sabres of Paradise, and a guy who talks about this stuff really well too. So let's just get into it, shall we? Without further delay, my conversation with Jagz Kooner.
Brought to you by acidnation.com.
Jagz Kooner, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thank you very much, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great to have you on. We were just talking off camera about the fact that we've both had lots on this year, but of course you have had a very significant year because Sabres of Paradise have reformed and you've been playing shows for the first time in a long time, correct?
Yes, it's been a very, very long time. 30 years to be exact.
Right, that is a long time, yeah, in fairness. Like, yeah. How has it all gone? Tell me about it.
It's been amazing. It really couldn't have gone any better, actually. I mean, it was a long time in the process of getting it to go out live. And it's a bit of a long-winded story, but it basically stems from Ian Weatherall, Andrew Weatherall's brother, kind of asking us, well, he called me and said, look, Jagz, it's the anniversary of the albums, maybe, we should do something with them, now that Andrew's gone. And I was like, oh my God, has it been 20 years since the album's come out? And he went, no, it's been 30. So I was like, oh yeah, right. Okay. And then it was just a case, that kind of started the whole process. And then Warp were interested in re-releasing it. And then it was like, well, if Warp are going to re-release it, I mean, we should try and promote it somehow as well, So what I did was I spoke to all the original band members and said, look, if we were to reform the band, would you be up for doing it and getting back on the road to do a few shows? And everybody was really positive and really up for it. I mean, the only reason we can make this work is the fact that Andrew wasn't in the actual live band. He didn't really enjoy doing that side of it, and if he was an integral part of the live band, we wouldn't have been able to do what we've done this year. But it's gone amazingly well. The interest has been incredible. The love for Andrew Weatherall out there is undiminished. The shows we played, you could just tell it really meant a lot to a lot of the people who turned up to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, has it changed at all in the way the setup works and the way the band kind of like knits together?
No, it's exactly the same. It's still the 5 original. There was 5 people in the band in the actual live band, which consisted of myself and Gary, who was also in the Sabres, and then we also had 3 musicians who came on board and joined the Sabres, and that was Rich there, who was also in Red Snapper, Nick Abnett, who was also in the band The Aloof, which was another band I was in, and then Phil Mossman, who used to come and play guitar with us, and also then after leaving Sabres went and joined LCD Sound System. So we kind of had we had a good friendship, and we were always kind of stayed in touch as well. So, it wasn't like, there wasn't any kind of like bad vibe between anyone where we parted company 30 years ago and it all fell apart into kind of a rock and roll kind of cliched myth of everybody hated each other and wanted to kill each other at the end of a tour. So that was really good. So from that point of view, it worked out really well, getting everyone together. And truth be told, when we all got together and got into a room and started to go through the songs, it was just like, there's almost like 30 years hadn't passed. We were still all just able to do what we did before. The only difference was, I think this time round, we actually were better musicians than we were 30 years ago, because now everyone's kind of grown up, takes things a lot more sensibly and seriously.
Yeah, that does happen, doesn't it? Yeah,
the shenanigans go out the window because you can no longer keep up with the rock and roll lifestyle that we were doing 30 years ago. So it was kind of more pleasant in certain ways, and it worked out amazingly well. And yeah, I mean, it's just the live setup is exactly what we were doing 30 years ago. The Phil's on guitar, Nick Abnett's on bass, Gary's on keyboards, Rich there's on percussion and effects, and then I'm dubbing it all up and doing some, sort of like drum machines and synths as well. And yeah, it's just been fantastic.
So was Primavera the biggest show? I've had a quick look through the list. I mean, it seems like
well, it depends on what your definition.
Quite a wide range, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your definition of a big gig is, really.
Yeah, I mean, audience-wise, but so obviously the enjoyment-wise, it can be very different to that.
Well, it is, but I mean, I think what we, the way it went was, we were actually asked to play Sydney Opera House. Was our first? Really? Yeah, was our first show. And then when
that's
we
a good
were
first show.
Yeah, I know. But the problem with that is it's kind of you're straight in at the deep end there, aren't you? It's not even like, oh,
of course,
let's just gradually build up to that. It's actually like, damn, it's Sydney Opera House. So what we had to do was we had to do a warm up show before that, which we did at Fabric.
Okay,
and the Fabric show was. We were all a little bit nervous because obviously we've not played together for 30 years, and it's the first show we done after 30 years, so we didn't really know how the fans and the crowd were going to take it. We did a lot of prep work to get it to that, but I mean, it was the first run of shows were literally do Fabric, which was sold out, leave there, jump on a plane, and then go play Sydney Opera House literally the following night, which is a little bit daunting. And it's but that was absolutely amazing as well. And then straight from there we went to Primavera, and that was another absolutely fantastic show as well.
It's a great festival, isn't it, Primavera?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, it's sunny, it's warm. You don't have to wear layers of
Barcelona
clothes.
In June,
Yeah,
exactly. What's not to like?
Yeah, and we saw a few other bands as well. Met up with some friends out there. The crowd were fantastic. There was a lot of love for the Sabres and for Andrew Weatherall wherever we went. So it's been a really, really successful year. Really good year.
That's great. I mean, to what extent was it a surprise to you all, the fact that you were able to come back and do it and people were, into it and there's an appetite for it? I mean, to what extent were you, nervous and trepidatious about it? And to what extent was it a surprise that actually, the reception has been as good as it has been?
It all stems from kind of a good friend of mine, Toby Peacock, who used to work at Wall of Sound Records alongside Mark Jones. And I kind of reached out to him and said, Tobe, kind of, there's the potential that we might do something with the Sabres of Paradise. Do you think there would be any interest or whatever? And he was like, okay, well, look, let me do a bit of research. And, he spoke to a couple of people, then got our management, who now consists of Toby Peacock and Andy Spence, who have been absolutely amazing. And they reached out to another old friend of mine called Alex Bruford, who now works at Rome Artists. And Alex used to be in a band called The Infidels that I produced absolutely years ago. And he's now the golden boy when it comes to, booking bands and stuff. And he's kind of reached out and, he said to me, oh, Jagz, listen, I've reached out to a few people and Sydney Opera House want you to play. And it was like, oh, okay. So, right.
What was the event at Sydney Opera House that they wanted you to play at?
So there's this thing called Vivid Live, and it basically is this kind of festival that happens in Sydney where they light up a lot of the city with 3D graphics and illuminations, and it looks spectacular. They light up the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House and loads of other buildings, and it's absolutely stunning. And there's loads of kids running around at night because it's just like, it's like a wonderland with all this illuminations everywhere and 3D mapping and projections. And it was part of that, really. So we did that, and it was. I mean, it was surreal. It's really surreal. We've not done anything for 30 years, and then our first official gig back was the Sydney Opera House, and it was like, okay, that's and then we got to the Sydney Opera House, and we went in, and it was the Joan Sutherland room that we were playing in, which is, I think, it's 1,500 people or whatever. And we went in there, and it is a seated auditorium. It's an incredible building. The Sydney Opera House, acoustically designed and stunning architecture. We were so well looked after by all the people there. We were so welcomed into Australia. It was incredible, and then we, that show, I was a bit worried. I was like, we've just done Fabric, which is a nightclub, and everybody was going crazy. And now we're playing Sydney Opera House, where everyone's sitting down. Everyone's seated, and
it's a very different context for the music.
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost like it's it was like, oh, okay, this could be a bit strange if everyone's just sitting there, just watching us, and then at the end of each song, you get a little clap and a cheer.
Yeah, right.
And then we were only 2 songs in, and by the 3rd song, people got up, started dancing, and then nobody sat down for the whole night, and it was just amazing. And then we this time round as well, we did a load of songs that we never used to do before. And one of the ones that we did was actually Smoke Belch, the Beatless mix, which we never used to play live before. As a matter of fact, we did a whole load of songs this time round that we never did. I mean, last time we only ever did about 5-6 songs, and we only did about 15 gigs in total before we called it a day. So this time round, it's like, well, we're going to have to play a proper set. So, we added a load of songs. And when we did Smoke Belch Beatless mix, which does mean a lot to quite a lot of people, because, I've had people come up to me and say, oh, that was the song that I got married to, and that's the song that, I'm going to play at my funeral. They're going to play at my funeral. And, I had one person, tell me that it was the song that they played when they buried their son, and it was just like, oh wow, that's like, so it really means a lot to a lot of people, that song. So when we played it, there was a lot of emotional people in the venue, and you could just see the love everybody had for Sabres. So that kind of made it, that validated it for us. So it and then it was just like doing Fabric, it was a great response. Everybody loved it. Sydney Opera House, that went brilliant. And then after that, we actually was like, right, we can go on and do this now without, it being a nerve-wracking experience of thinking, how's people going to respond to this? How are we going to be able to make it work? Or is anyone going to turn up? So, and then,
which is always a big question when you're at the outset of this kind of thing, right?
Well, it is as well, and you got to bear in mind, that we didn't really, the last time we did anything and released anything was 30 years ago, and we had a lot of promoters who were like, oh my God, the Sabres of Paradise are back. Brilliant, amazing. Oh, we really need them. We really want them. And then we had a load of other promoters going, who? Never heard of them, because if you're 30 or 35 and under, there's very little chance you would know anything about the Sabres of Paradise. So, it's been it's one or the other. So the response has been amazing, and we've had a great time. And then Primavera was superb, and then we did Deck Mantle, which is a brilliant electronic festival in Amsterdam.
Yeah, of course.
And then it's just been pretty smooth sailing since then, really.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's gone great, and it must be it must be pretty exhilarating, because I mean, since the Sabres disbanded, I mean, you mentioned the Aloof and you've done various different projects, but this must be the first time in a while that you've played shows of that scale, right? Or am I wrong about that?
That's your cat.
Before you I'm gonna have to move him out of here. Hang on a sec, just one sec.
Okay. Oh, brilliant. That's
Okay.
Brilliant. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, after the Sabres split, I didn't really do anything. Well, after the Sabres split and after I left the Aloof, I just became a record producer. I wasn't.
Yeah,
in
right.
band.
I mean, you're my understanding of, like, you're digging into your biography and your history of records. I mean, would you consider yourself to be an engineer as opposed to a producer, or producer engineer? Because people have different relationships with these two things, and they take different meanings to them. Yeah,
I'd say I'm more of a producer. The problem is I'm not really an engineer, because I didn't go to college or uni to study it. Basically, where I come from is I used to DJ when I was a kid in my bedroom. Basically, when hip hop came along, I saw what Grandmaster Flash did, and I was like, I like that. I like what he's doing there, and I kind of taught myself how to DJ and cut up records and mix them and do that. And then, I started from that. And so I just had 2 turntables and a mixer. And then I thought, I'm going to get a little drum machine that I can put in the background while I'm doing my cutting and scratching and mixing, to give it a bit more oomph when I'm kind of doing, I was part of a West London, hip hop crew at the time. And it was just like all about the DJs and scratching and mixing and break dancers and graffiti artists. And it was kind of the start of the whole, early electro hip hop movement.
Okay, you've been watching this episode for 15 minutes, so well done. Well done for sticking around this long. I'm just going to take this opportunity to tell you about the ways you can support the show. We have a Patreon. There are 2 tiers there. The more expensive of which is only $10 a month and gets you all of the music that we release on our labels, so Hot Flush Recordings and affiliated labels too. So that's a brilliant way to support us and also get some great music, as well as the knowledge that you're supporting this unbelievable podcast. Head over to scubaofficial.io/support and get involved. And with that, I'll let you get back to the episode. Thank you. Let me just interrupt you there, because I mean, I've had a few people on the show who came up in this era. So, for example, I'm now blanking on names, but I mean, I want to say Adrian Sherd, but he predates this a little bit. But yeah, people like Mr. Scruff, guy called Gerald, and various others. And that early hip hop scene sounds like it was absolutely awesome. I have to say, it sounds like a really, really exciting time to be a kid. Always some incredible music. I mean, the London kind of version of it sounds like it was a really cool thing to be a part of as a kid. I mean, is that sounds like that's your recollection of it too?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to bear in mind, right, that, what was I, 14, 15 at the time? And I was, up until then, I was listening to, I was listening to a lot. I think it was Capital Radio and Kid Jensen, and you had like early Depeche Mode and Human League, and bands like that who were doing really interesting electronic stuff. But that early electronic stuff was also kind of then from America came the early electro and early hip hop. You had Africa Bambaataa and Soul Sonic Force. You had people like the Johnson Crew. You had people like, all that kind of early electro, which was the basis of hip hop in a weird way. World Class Wrecking Crew. One of the guys in the World Class Wrecking Crew from LA was a guy called Dr. Dre. And that's kind of where he sort of started out as well. So, that you know what it was? I think that was where people who were like myself finally found our tribe, if you want to call it that. That was that was the thing that kind of was like, oh, that's me. I'm not just following the herd here. This is what I love. And all that early electro hip hop stuff was just, not only was it groundbreaking, but it was a cultural movement. You had this new kind of music, which was amazing. You had a new kind of dance as well, break dancing. Where the hell did that come? That was in itself.
Yeah, right.
Graffiti art is still, I still see graffiti art, and it's still like, wow, that's, you see a good piece of art, graffiti art, and it's, the designs on them and stuff are incredible. So, you had that, and then you had clothing, the whole movement with like hip hop with the clothing of, sports based clothing. And so for me, it was really the first kind of, that's where I felt like I belonged. That was where, it kind of meant a lot to me. And so from that point of view, it was like, that's my scene. That's my tribe. That's my thing. And, I used to listen to like loads of radio stations. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people stem from that. I'm pretty certain Paul Wolford, Special Request, I think he comes through from there. I think there's a lot of people who, I think even Carl Cox comes through from that as well, and there was some, because Carl Cox, he's a pretty amazing scratch DJ as well, so, that all stems from that kind of thing. So, we've got this, kind of, I suppose in a way, that's your kind of introduction to the potential path you could take as a career later on. It was like, oh, I don't have to kind of become a doctor or an accountant or something like that. I can actually, there might be something here that I that I really like, that I might be able to do. So yeah, so from the early hip hop movement is where it all sort of stems. But I used to have the 2 turntables and a mixer. I used to just kind of practice at home, then bought a drum machine, like I said, to make the mixes a bit more interesting. And then I bought a little reverb unit to make the drum machine sound better. And I thought, I better buy a multi-track recorder to record the mixes onto,
and so it begins, right?
And that's the slippery slope. And then before you know it, you've got a little home studio, and truth be told, this is like my home studio now. I've never grown out of having a home studio. So, and that kind of where it sort of started from me. And so I never went to college. I never studied at a uni. I don't really know much about mic placements. I don't really know how to do certain things when it comes to the engineering side of things, but I am pretty good with getting people to do what I want them to do in order to get something sounding good coming through the speakers. So, I used to kind of, I'm pretty good at kind of manipulating things and pretty good with a computer and kind of getting the best out of people. So we always record something interesting and something that works well. So that was the introduction, and that's kind of where it went. And that's why I consider myself more of a producer. More of a producer, a remixer than an engineer.
Yeah, okay. I suppose engineer, you're talking in the sort of like almost a kind of formal sense. I think when people think about sound engineering now, I think it's much more common to be kind of like self-taught in that kind of a way, So like if you've got a ton of kit and you know how to use it, like to me that almost makes you an engineer, because so many people don't, know how to get their hands dirty.
Absolutely. No, I'm a technical geek. I am a technical geek. Yeah. No,
I suppose that's what I meant. Yeah.
This is how sad I am, right? So for my 21st birthday party, or rather for my 21st birthday, I stayed in and read the manual of a Roland TR-909 drum machine.
Okay. Well, that was a good way to spend your 21st birthday. I think we can
Yeah,
best. I think it's that's a
I've,
decent attempt. Yeah.
yeah, and I still got the 909 drum machine and the 808 and all that I still use. But I mean, I just love technology. I love machines. I love, I just feel happy in these kind of environments where I've got loads of synths and drum machines and computers and toys like that around me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to get into this because I actually read an interview with you from 1995 in Sound on Sound where you're talking about your studio then, but we'll get on to that. Let's just continue in the very very early years of this, because you're talking, I suppose, that early hip hop period is sort of like early to mid 80s, right? So like 83, 84, 85.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And then even probably a bit of 86 as well. I think it's kind of somewhere around there. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and then there is this incident that I've read about in 91 where you meet Andrew Weatherall. So just tell me how you get from one place to another there. So like we're mid 80s, you're listening to hip hop, scratch DJ in your bedroom, that kind of stuff. And then you're at a party in 91. So tell me, fill in that gap for me.
Okay. All right. Okay. So on 15 years old, 16 years old, I can cut up records, I can mix them, I can make bootlegs and blah, 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 and that kind of thing. And I've got, obviously, then friends who are DJs. A friend of mine, Glenn Gunner, was a DJ, and he used to DJ at a few places. He played at, Camden Electric Ballroom. He used to DJ there every, I think it was Friday night. Had another friend, you meet people in the scene as such, and then, so, Glenn was a friend of mine. With hip hop, what happened was if you can mix hip hop records, it really holds you in good stead for when acid house and house come along, because house is just four on the floor. There's no intricate beats going on, and mixing that is
a lot easier.
Yeah. And so, I used to, we used to go to clubs, and they were, at the time, they were like rare groove clubs, right? So, we go to places where Norman J was playing and, people like that. And every now and again at certain clubs like that, you'd have the rare groove and the, going on and the old soul and stuff. And then every now and again they'd stop and a different DJ would come on who'd play house music. And basically I was kind of there at the start of the house music as well. Cause I remember when house music came along and I first heard, Future, acid tracks,
Yep.
that really blew my mind. I was just like, wow, this is just, it's something else. It's like nothing I'd heard before. And then I started not moving away from hip hop, but it was like when that happened, it was just kind of a natural progression. That was more club music than in a way hip hop was as well. So house music started to come in, and weirdly enough, when that started to come in, once again, my fascination with machines and studio stuff and being a geek was like, well, how's it made, And it was like, okay, well, I found out it was like a 909 drum machine, and I found out it was this, I had this chat with somebody, and found out that it was a Roland 303, which mine's just has gone in for service at the moment, but I normally have one sitting here, and it was that. And then I was like, oh, brilliant. So I kind of, I think in 88 or early, I think it was 1988, I phoned this music shop and I said, oh, well, do you have any of those, I've seen you advertise, you've got a Roland 303 for sale. And they went, yeah. We've got a few here, because what happened was the Roland 303 came out, and it was it was really weird. It's like the 808 and the 808 drum machine and the 303 synths. When they came out, Roland's marketing machine got it completely wrong, right?
Yeah.
They were like, with the 808 drum machine, they was like, do you have a drummer? You do? Great. You don't need them anymore because you can use this box instead. So people were like,
this
brilliant.
sounds nothing like a drum kit. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's nothing like a drummer at all. And so people were like sacking their drummers. No, I don't need you anymore. You're a pain. And going to buy this box, turning it on and pressing play. And they're like,
what? What's
that don't
this?
sound nothing like a drummer. And the same with the 303. It was like, do you have a bass player? Well, you don't need one anymore because you've got this box. So people were like, oh, brilliant. Getting it going, well, that don't sound nothing like a bass player. So those machines originally flopped, right? They couldn't get rid of them, and they were just collecting dust in the bargain bin in music shops. And so I phoned this music shop after I found out what it was. And I said, oh, you've got a 303 in stock. And they went, yeah, we've got a few here, they're just sitting here. I was like, oh, brilliant. I said, please, can you reserve me one? Don't let anyone take it. And I was like, dude, they've been sitting here for like 8 months. Nobody's interested in these machines. They're just sitting in the bargain box and we can't get rid of them. I said, no, please reserve me one. I need to come and get it. So anyway, I got on a bus and went all the way over to the place. And I was like, oh, hi, yeah, I phoned about the 303. And they were like, oh, right. I went, you still got it? And they went, yeah, of course we still got it. It's like, nobody's interested in it. So I grabbed it off him and I gave him £25 for it because that's what they were asking for. And he's like, how come you're so excited about these machines? And I was like, well, I said, this machine is going to change the world, right? And he looked at me, and he looked at me like, he's like, oh my God, we get some right nutters in here, but you must be topping the lot. You know what I mean? and I was right. It did change the world. Yeah. I mean, once again,
the evidence is clear. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, once again, like we were talking about hip hop, and it was a cultural movement. It had the music, it had the art, it had the dress codes or style of dress. It had, a way of being. And the same thing that happened when sort of like the Second Summer of Love came along and with the music and clothing and the art and how all of a sudden people could then change, so all of a sudden, I had friends who were tube drivers and they were like, oh, I don't need to be a tube driver. I can now work in house in various forms. Record companies started to take note of it, early on. And he was like, dance music was kind of frowned upon. Glastonbury weren't into dance music and trying to get, people in Glastonbury involved in, they were like, no, this is nonsense. We're not having any of that. And now it's like the most predominant thing there as well. And, in the early days, it was from, we had that same rubbish in the media as well, where it's like, oh, it's all about drugs. It's like, don't let your kids go to acid house raves and they're all going to come back. And it's that same, like in the 1950s, it was about, marijuana and acid, and in the 70s it was speed, and it was like, the punk movement once again, if your kids are punk, that's the end of their lives, they've ruined themselves. It's that same sort of kind of rebellion that led to sort of new movements being created. And the same thing happened with acid house. So for me, it was that happened, and then I knew how to use those machines. So I knew how to use a 303, I knew how to use a 909. Me and a friend of mine, Richie Fermi, we used to just make these little acid house bootlegs. And then in 1989, I got signed to MCA Records as being part of a crew called Adrenaline MOD. We were the first band.
Yeah. I discovered this morning actually, and it's like it's proper full on acid house, right? It's
It's just relentless. Us going bonkers with these machines, and
it's
as a matter of fact,
also I have to say, you actually absolutely nailed it. Yeah.
So we were the first acid house band to get signed to a major label in the UK. As a matter of fact,
crazy. Yeah.
We were pretty young at the time, and Richie, who was in the band, was so young. He was only 16. His mum had to sign his recording contract because he wasn't old enough. So we were doing that, and then me and Richie, we'd take out a couple of machines with us to play live. So we took the 303 out, we took the 909 out, we do these bits and warehouse parties, and it was great fun. And then eventually I set up a little studio and I
So
started to
let
make.
me just sorry, let me stop you there. So where were you playing and how did you get these gigs? So this is sort of A7, 88 era acid house.
88, 89,
Okay.
and kind of probably going into 1990. So by this point, I knew Charlie Chester, who used to run Flying, and Dean Thatcher, who used to DJ there. And at that point, I had a little studio as well, and me and Dean Thatcher would start recording stuff, and that was the foundation of the Aloof. And then I'd make these bootlegs there as well with a couple of friends. And the bootlegs we made, one of them called Tarantella Nakamura. Basically, it was 1990, and we were making bootlegs, and we were like, what do we call it? And we called it, Tarantella by Nakamura, which is like, the mafia. And it was like, everybody was like, at the time was like, it's, bootlegs coming in from Italy, Italian tunes. So we were like, and a friend of mine was like Italian. So he's like, let's call it that and like press it up on a white label and send it out and make it look like it's an Italian bootleg that's coming to the country. And so we did that. And Andrew Weatherall got hold of it. He got a copy of it and he loved it. As a matter of fact, I heard from various people that it was actually the tune. It was the last tune of the Boys Own East Grinstead Weekender that Andrew played, and it was the very last tune of the whole festival, kind of thing. People told me that. I wasn't there. I was still at home studying manuals for equipment and and stuff like that. They didn't let me out very often. They still don't, actually. And it was just like, oh wow, your tune was like the big tune of the weekend. I was like, no way. And then and then by this point I was then going to Flying, the nightclub, because obviously I was working with Dean Thatcher, and it was just it just behind the Astoria in Soho and Soho.
Yeah. Okay. Let me stop you and ask you for a detailed description of Flying, because I mean that's one of the things I really like doing on this show, is getting people who are at these kind of seminal raves and seminal clubs to actually tell the audience exactly what they were like. So yeah, talk about Flying. What exactly was it like as an experience?
Okay, so Flying was in it was at the Soho Theatre Club, which is just behind where the Astoria used to be, and you used to go in and stairs going down. And first of all, on the door, it was Ali Joby, who was a really, the bouncers were really, really lovely people as well. And there was friends who were on the door who were the bouncers, who were not to be trifled with either, but they were lovely people. So, they were welcoming. They were nice people who'd welcome you to the club, kind of thing. It wasn't like moody. So you'd go in and you go downstairs and there's this one dance floor, and you had Andrew Weatherall DJing there. You had Terry Farley DJing there. Dean Thatcher was the resident there. Fabi Paraz would DJ there as well. Danny Rampling would rock up. And, it was kind of like, it was the scene as such, it was brilliant. So, you get kind of a really good crowd of people all coming together.
How big's the venue roughly, capacity-wise?
Do you know what? I don't know, but I'd say probably 250, maybe at 300 maximum, if that. And it was just, it was a bit of a sweatbox, and it was brilliant. The energy was incredible. Everybody was happy and jolly, and it was just a brilliant time. And it was my regular, every weekend, because I worked with Dean Thatcher, and by that time the Aloof were kind of signed to Cowboy Records as well, which was the record label Dean and Charlie Chester set up, and I just was on the guest list. It's like popping down to the local in a weird way. So, it is one of those legendary clubs. There was great people there, great DJs there. Everybody had a good time. Everybody got on. It's just, it's just like a big family kind of, in a weird way. So that was kind of like my regular kind of hangout, and for me as well, it was really good because it's like, I would go to clubs to not necessarily dance, but to listen to the music, to kind of analyze it and work out what was going on and see what worked and didn't work and see what people were really getting excited about, and kind of, it was kind of like going and doing my homework. So that's what the club was like, and it was just, it was great, and then we also had another club that we used to go to on a Sunday afternoon called Full Circle, which was, a really great club that was out in sort of out near Heathrow Airport as well. So, we had our kind of regular places that we used to go to, but Soho Theatre Club Flying was one of those ones that it was just, great people there all the time. And incidentally, that is where I was when I met Andrew, because, I'm sort of standing there at the bar, kind of with Gary from Sabres as well, but from the Aloof at the time. And then, and at that time, Andrew was like, he's a mythical godlike figure, because obviously he just
already this was his status.
Oh my God. You got to, okay, so by that time he'd remixed Primal Scream and made Loaded, right? So he'd done that.
Of course, yeah, okay. Yeah.
And he'd done that, and he'd done Don't Fight It, Feel It. He'd remixed My Bloody Valentine and James. And everything he touched just turned to gold. And he was probably like the most sought after remixer at the time then as well. Screamadelica was blowing up as well. And so I was like, oh my God, there's Andrew Weatherall. God, oh my God, it's like a bit of a fanboy kind of vibe about it, And then he sort of comes over to me and he's like, you're Jagz, aren't you? And I went, yeah, I am. And he said, oh, I'm Andrew Weatherall. I was like, yeah, I know who you are, mate. It's like, it's just like, anyone who doesn't know who you are is who you should be concerned with, sort of thing. But he's like, yeah, I'm Andrew Weatherall. I was like, yeah, I know. And he's like, listen, he goes, I love what you do. And I was like, right. And I was like, I love what you do, And he's like, we should get in the studio one day and do something. And I'm like, yeah, that'd be amazing. And I was like, didn't know whether it was just the beer talking or he was being serious. And he was like, he's like, look, give us your number and like, we'll speak soon. I was like, yeah, no problem. So I gave him a number, and I didn't really think anything of it. It was really nice to meet him, really nice to chat, hung out for a bit. He was a lovely guy. And then we left the club, and that was it. I didn't really think anything more of it. And then about 3 days later, he's kind of phoned me and gone, oh, Jagz, it's Andrew. I was like, oh, hello, mate. He's like, do you fancy getting in the studio? I was like, yeah. He said, brilliant. He said, I've got to do a remix of this tune by Jar Wobble. It's got Sinead O'Connor on it. It's called Visions of You. Be down at the Workhouse Studio on Old Kent Road at 12 o'clock on next Tuesday or whatever. I was like, right.
Okay.
Result. I was like, okay, put the phone down, phone Gary. I was like, we got to get to the studio with Andrew and do some tracks with him and make this remix of Jar Wobble and Sinead O'Connor tune. And that's how it started. So we went down there, and, there's this big SSL desk, and I'd never worked on an SSL desk in my life, but I think that helped. I think that held me in good stead, because it was like, I didn't really know, well, I knew how a desk works, but I didn't know how SSL works. So for me, it was like, I'm just going to abuse this thing till I get what I want out of it. And if the assistant looks at me horrified, I take that as a sign that I'm doing something right. And that's what it was. And then so we started doing the Jar Wobble Sinead O'Connor remix. Jar Wobble came down, which really freaked me out, because obviously...
Yeah, another one. Yeah, okay. It's like, oh...
Because
okay.
I'm like, I'm like a public image massive fan as well. So he came down and he's like sitting next to us, and I'm pressing play, and he's like listening. And I was like, this is getting really surreal now. I'm in the studio with Andrew Weatherall, Jar Wobble sitting next to me. And he's like, oh yeah, guys, it's great, man. I love it. And he's just like, let's do it. And then he kind of went, and he's just like, okay, this is, and then it went really well. Everyone loved it. We had a great time doing it. And that was sort of like the start of me and Gary working with Andrew Weatherall, and then building up and doing all the remixes and productions that we did do.
How did you know Gary?
So when we were doing the Aloof stuff, when me and Dean were doing bits and bobs, we used to go to a music shop in Hounslow called Project Music, and Gary used to work in there, and I used to buy my equipment in there. And then what they did was they built a little studio above the shop. And it was like a demoing facility, listen to bits of equipment, check out how things work, blah, blah, blah. And they kind of built it like that. But they then did start hiring it out to people they knew. And I was like, oh, can me and Dean go in there? We've got some remixes to do and bits and bobs. You'd be interested to do some stuff. And they were like, yeah, sure. So, we kind of booked it. And then, because Gary was downstairs, we was like, we need a keyboard player. Do you know anyone? And then the Jim St. Pierre, who owns, he was like, oh, Gary's amazing keyboard player. You should get him to come up. So we was like, oh, brilliant. He was like, guys, do you want to come up and just play some keys and do some bits? And he was like, yeah, no problem. So he came up and he's like he's a genius piano player and keyboard player. And he's like a, virtuoso in bloody every other instrument as well. So he can play.
Okay.
He can play keys. He can play, guitar. He can play bass. Harmonica, melodica. He can do bits of percussion. Great on synths and just all round
a useful man to have in the studio.
Exactly,
basically.
Especially if you like me, who's only ever read an instruction manual on a piece of drum machine, or somebody who can actually play something is really handy to have. So he then came in, did a couple of things with us, and then me and Dean were like, oh, he's brilliant. We should definitely get him involved in all the Aloof stuff. So we had a meeting with Gary, and we was like, guys, do you want to kind of join the Aloof? He was like, yeah, I'd love to. And then he joined up, and that was the start of me and Gary's partnership of doing stuff with the Aloof, and then going on to then doing stuff together with Andrew, and then forming the Sabres.
Yeah. What were the musical influences at that point, would you say? Obviously you come out of the hip hop thing and you talked about, the early house records and, being influenced and that kind of stuff. But I mean, the Aloof and then subsequently the Sabre stuff is, it's not acid house. It's sort of like, you can kind of hear the sort of sound of it. It's sort of in there, but like, where did it come from sonically, would you say?
Well, that's to do with Andrew Weatherall's unbelievably immense knowledge of music. His record collection was, when we used to go around his house, was just unbelievable. And not just unbelievable because he had a lot of records. It was unbelievable in how varied it was. He'd had a great selection, or massive selection of dub, reggae, acid house, rockabilly, electronic stuff, rare indie stuff. Oh, all sorts. And that you could see that when he DJ'd as well, because he could go out and he could play a dub set and it'd be incredible. He could go out and play a techno set and it'd be incredible. He could go out and play a house set, it'd be amazing. And then he'd go out and play like a rockabilly set, and he'd be out there and unbelievable. It's just like right the way across the board. I've actually seen him do like a kind of old soul set as well when we were, I think it was the launch party of the label or something, and it was like, it's just incredible wealth of knowledge that he had when it came to music, and it really does stem from that, So we'd go into Andrew's house and it'd be like, we got these records behind me, and it was like, okay, Gary would choose 3 records, I would choose 3 records, and Andrew would choose 3. So, I'd go up there and I'd, sort of get one from there, and then get one from that bit there, and then one from that bit there, and then Gary would choose 3, and Andrew, and then we'd just take them, put them in, put them on the table and go, oh, that's quite a good bit. Oh, that's not bad. All right, grab that, sample that, grab that bit. Oh, that's not so bad. Grab that. Oh, that's a nice bit. Yeah, grab. And we just build up a kind of collage of samples, and then it was like, oh, that one works with that one. Okay, that's the start of something. Okay, get them two together. Oh, those three work together. That one doesn't work with anything, so get rid of that. And then we start forming the sort of the foundations of songs, and then once we'd have them, then it was like, right, okay, let's add some beats into that. Let's add a bit of percussion. Right, Gary, let rip on that. Let's see what you can do on that. And Gary would then play the bass line and add a bit of guitar and do some keyboard. I'd then get on like the drum machines and synths, and we'd work some bits and bobs out, and then we just all get it coming up on a mixing desk, like one of them old big mixing desks that you used to see in like the pro studios. And we'd kind of have it that each person had 8 channels of the desk.
Okay.
And then we'd mute everything out, and then it was kind of like mixing by hearing. And it was like, okay, let's unmute the bass drum unmuted, right? Press play, bang, doof, 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 and then unmute things as we were going along to build up the arrangements. There was no defined arrangements, and it was really musical doing it that way. It's kind of like you're not looking at blocks of Lego going across on a computer screen as you do with modern music making software. And so it's quite liberating from that point of view. And that's kind of how we did what we did. And that's why we didn't fall into that bracket of every tune was 130 BPM banging techno workout, even though at the time we were then spending a lot of time at Sabres Sonic, the club, and listening to what was going on there. But, there were some great DJs there who didn't play 130 BPM. We'd have, we had like Cold Cut come and play, Bob Jones would come and do a rare groove set, all sorts of interesting characters come and play. So it all fed into what we then did in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much a kind of dub sensibility, isn't it? It's using the desk as an instrument, basically.
Yeah, it's about that still carries on now with what we do when we play live. I literally have a desk and loads of effects units and a couple of synths and drum machines, and all I'm doing is firing off sounds and dubbing it up and EQing stuff and muting things in and out. And it's that same kind of principle methodology that we applied back then that we do now.
Yeah, I mean, and as you say, it was quite fleeting. You only played a few shows in the first place. It really caught a lot of hype. And it sounds, well, I mean, by reading, what you've talked about this before in interviews and also interviews from back then, it sounds like it becoming popular was not good in your minds. It sounds like that, like it kind of stopped because you felt it was getting too popular. I mean, to what extent is that accurate?
I mean, when you start off and you do something, you never think, you're just doing it for the love. I mean, you should be just doing it for the love. You're never really going to, I'm going to form a band now and we're going to dominate the world.
We're going to be massive.
If that's your first thought, then realistically, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. But we were just, I've referred to this in the past as well. With the Sabres, we just loved doing what we were doing. I remember at the time we had our manager, and our manager was like, we were in a cab once, and the Sabres started to blow up, and then all these record companies came knocking, offering us huge sums of money.
Yeah, right. Because this was the era where people did still get offered huge sums of money, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, very, very big 6-figure, bordering on close to 7 figures,
Yeah.
And we just did music because we loved it, and we had great time in the studio. Being in the studio with Andrew was always a joy. We would laugh our socks off. We'd have a brilliant time in the studio. It was just great fun. And it started to blow up. We released a song and it went in the charts and it did well, and then we released another one and it went in the charts and it did well, and it's just like, okay. And then record companies were really interested, and they were interested because they, obviously it's Andrew, and then what we were doing was, drawing a lot of attention, and so we were like, well, maybe we should get a band together as well, just to do a few shows. And when we did that, I think that really got the attention of record companies because they were like, this is something that they could do live, and all of a sudden
they can understand that, right?
Yeah, right.
That's the
So
thing,
now it's
because
we're not just a bunch of studio bods where we give you an album and then we'll have our pictures taken and you can put it out there. It's like all of a sudden they can take this on the road and promote it. Yeah, you're right. So that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, I think that was a big issue for majors trying to get their heads around dance music in that era. Like, they just didn't quite understand it. But then when you put it in that context, or actually we're a band, we've got a drummer, like we're actually, this is something that you can kind of like visually understand, then yeah, I guess it makes it much easier for your kind of like, average cigar chomping record executive with those kinds of budgets to start throwing them around, right?
Exactly. But you know what? We still get it now, right? So when we went to Deck Mantle, we were setting up, people were like, oh, you've got instruments. And we like, yeah. They're like, oh, we thought you were like kind of what is the typical dance setup, which is two blokes with a computer and Ableton and then a couple of things. It was like, no, we've got real instruments. There's real bass, real guitar. And so back then, which is the same setup we had now, people saw that and record companies saw it and went, oh my God, right. Okay. They could do this live. So from that point of view, that's when record companies really started to take notice of us and were really interested in signing us. And it was a bit of a strange one because we just did what we knew how to do. We weren't really doing anything other than we wanted to do, in the sense like, well, it's dance music, but in all honesty, we're not just four on the floor, thump, 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 thump. There's real bass lines in here. There's real guitar. There's real keyboard instruments and parts going on. It's not just a repetitive loop that's going on that you could kind of get away with just being on stage. And so, it worked from that point of view. And you're right, there was pound signs flashing in record company executives' eyes as a result of that. And so, we were then getting taken out for dinner by these record companies who wanted to sign us. And we were sitting in the back of a cab once. And, I'll tell you a bit more about that in a second.
I'm laughing because that's also happened to me in the past. And it is such a weird experience, isn't it?
Right, Paul, let me tell you about that, right? So first of all, when the record company started to do that, were interested in taking us out to dinner, at that point, we kind of knew who we wanted to sign with already, right? We knew we wanted to be on Warp Records because that was the coolest label on the planet, right? But we were a bunch of chancers as well. And we were like, well, if somebody's going to give us free food, we should at least entertain the idea of having a conversation with them. And so basically what we did was we just viewed it as, well, oh, right, if they're going to take us out for dinner, we get a free meal out of this. So we just, London Records and Sony and BMG and everybody else, we were like, brilliant. I was like, wow, oh, look, Red Fort in Chutney Mary's and all these fancy restaurants. Can we get somebody to take us there? And it was just that. Nice. And we were like, we'd go out to these fancy restaurants and have a nice meal and stuff. And, we weren't really interested in signing with any of those labels. We just wanted the free food, really. So it was great. But then we were in a cab, right, after one of these free food, let's have a chat with a record label. And our managers were, BMG have offered like $500,000 and Sony have come back with 650 grand. And, we reckon if we hold out, somebody come in with $750,000 and blah. And I was just like sitting in the back of the cab with Andrew and Gary. And I just looked at Andrew and went, and the manager was like, what do you think? And I looked at Andrew and I went, I don't know what all the fuss is about. And he went, no, neither do I. You know what I mean? It's just like, and so we didn't take it seriously, and maybe we didn't take it seriously, or maybe we didn't really understand the economics of these things properly. And, we were like, well, we just want to sign with Warp and that's all we really want to do. And so, yeah, it's.
Can I just ask, what year are we in when this is happening? Sort of 94-ish? Is that sort of?
No, maybe end of 92, early 93.
Oh, so it's that. Okay, so that early, right? Yep.
Yeah. So we're talking around about that. So it's yeah, we signed to Warp, and it was great. We loved that label. They were brilliant people. They let us do exactly what we want, because we knew as well, you go to one of them big majors, and they give you a lot of money. They're going to tell you what they want rather than you deliver what you want to them. And the thing is, at the time we had our own studio called Sabersonic, which was basically that studio that I was telling you about that Project Music had in Hounslow above their shop. In the end, we took over that, and that became our studio. So that became Sabersonic Studios. So
that is the Sound on Sound interview that I referred to before from '95. That's where you are. Yeah. I mean, that sounded pretty great. I have to say, that place from what you say in that interview sounds pretty awesome.
It was brilliant because we had the studio there, we had a kitchen, we had White Noise, which was Chris Butler, and James Pitt, who upstairs, doing a promotions company. And
White Noise promo, yeah, right, okay, yeah.
So they were upstairs, and then James Pitt has gone on to set up Your Army, and Chris Butler's now managing Jalen and Gonda, and everyone. This is what I was saying about everyone suddenly saw a new way of being rather than becoming a plumber or train driver, and suddenly they were there was a career to be had out of acid house and the music industry. So, it opened the doors for a lot of people. So, we had them upstairs, we had a lounge area, we just, it was just a really, really good vibey building as well. And it was great fun just being in there pretty much every day of the week.
Right. Yeah. And you made some great records there. Absolutely. I mean, just to get technical for a moment, I absolutely geek out on this stuff as well. But in that Sound on Sound piece, you're talking about Akai samplers and how the Akai sampler is. I mean, I think for so much music in the '90s, the Akai sampler was a really key and central part to so many studios, and the sound of those transformers and all the rest of it. Talk a little bit about how you made music in that studio.
Okay, well, so, as I was saying, Paul, earlier, it's like, so we'll go get records from here and records from there and records from there and records from there and bits from there, and then we sample them, and it'd all go straight into an Akai sampler, right? So that's where it kind of starts. I mean, see, the thing is, it's, I've mentioned this before. It's like, and the samplers, Akai samplers, or samplers in general, whether they were the emulator, EMI ones or whatever, they were made so that basically you could have this box where in it you could have a choir, you could have classical orchestras and strings, you could have a piano, grand piano, you could have all these sounds in there, and you could load them in and play them out of this one box rather than having to cart a Hammond organ with you, a choir with you, a 16-piece orchestra, a grand piano, any of that. It was all in this box, and that's what it was designed for. You could kind of do that with it. And I think it's Marley Marl who used to work with like Salt and Pepper, and he was like, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take a little bit of this record and just loop it and loop it and loop it and keep it going, and I'm going to get people to sing over that. And I think it was the abuse of equipment that created, I think it was invention kind of comes about, as a necessity from not being able to do what you want to do, and you suddenly see this box.
It's similar to the 303, right? It's the exact same thing. It's like, you've got this box where, the intended purpose for it, it's fine, but actually, if you kind of bend it around a bit and do something a little bit different,
if you do something with it, exactly. If you abuse it, you can get it to do other things, and that was it. And so samplers were then a case of putting a needle on a record and grabbing a little bit of it and putting it inside the sampler and manipulating it, and then building it up onto a keyboard and then checking out the different samples you've sampled and seeing what worked with what. I still got my, as a matter of fact, I still got my S3000 here, and
have you?
I had to
actually, nice.
I had to dig it out. I had to dig it out in order to rebuild all the live stuff that we did back then. I still got the floppy disks. I still had the DAT tapes and everything, and it was just like, it was like, right, plug in the sampler and turn it on, and would it turn on or would it blow up? And it turned on, and it was like, brilliant. Now I'm going to put the floppy disk in there, which had the Sabres live in Japan, and put the disk in there. And then, you press load, and then you go and make a cup of tea. And by the time you come back, it's finished loading, because they used to be so slow. And then, I've found my old Alessi sequencer, which I'm just going to grab now, which is basically, this is my old sequencer that we used to use for live, right? So and it's what we used to use. The Prodigy used to use it, Liam used to use it live, and it's what Orbital used to use. They'd have a couple of these. And so I grabbed that, and, I had this box of stuff which was in the loft, which was labeled Sabres, and it hadn't been open for 30 years, And so I got the sequencer out as well, and then I plugged it in and turned it on, and it turned on. I was like, oh, that's the result. And I was like, I wonder if it's still got any of the old songs in there. And I flicked through the presets, and Smoke Belch was there, and Edge 6 was there, and Chapel Street was there, and Wilmot was there. And I was like, right, I'm going to connect a MIDI lead from my sequencer into my sampler and see what it does. And plugged it in, press play. Out of the speakers came Smoke Belch that we used to do live. And I was like, it freaked me out, because for 30 years, that stuff had been sitting there dormant, not turned on, not loved, not touched, archived, hidden away in a dark corner of the loft. And then it all came back to life beautifully. So I loved that sample, and it sounded just as good as the modern samplers you have. I couldn't tell the difference between the two when I fired up. And there's something about the converters on the Akai samplers that we used to use, and it was what worked, and it was just a beautiful sound as well. So yeah, it's back out in the rack, the sampler now, Yeah,
I mean, that's a great lesson for any aspiring producer watching this, listening to this. Keep your archives in order. Make sure you keep everything, because you never know. 30 years time.
Listen, I know I make it sound like, did that work out well? I mean, I've just had to do the same thing for Exterminator for Primal Scream. I had to dig out all the archive sessions and get them and sort them out. And prior to that, a while back as well, because I knew what Screamadelica was made on, and I had to load the samples for it. I had to give the Scream a hand rebuilding some bits of Screamadelica when they were rebuilding that. So it's been a lot of going up into the loft, finding old stuff and bringing it back down and hoping it's going to play and load and work out what it needs to do. But yeah, I mean, archive, look after it, bounce everything down, create stems that are audio that you can load into anything in years to come, because technology moves so fast that even loading something from 5 years ago, half of the plugins don't work now, half of the software's out of date. It's a valuable lesson, and I've learned that now, and I know not to fall short on that side of things again.
Totally. Yeah. So just I mean, we're just mindful of time a little bit. There's a few more things I want to cover, but just to finish up on, the kind of the end of Sabres in the first place. The kind of point I made about or the kind of hypothesis about it just becoming too popular for you guys, and wanting to step back from it, and just, I suppose, psychologically as much as anything else. I mean, as you look back on that period now, how do you feel about that as something, something that happened, something that you intentionally stepped back from at the point at which seemingly it could have gone on to become a much bigger thing, even though it was big at the time, a much bigger thing than it actually was?
Well, it's like I was saying to you earlier, Paul. It's like, we were sitting in the back of that cab, and they were like, "Oh, there's £500,000 here, £750,000 there," and I'm looking at Andrew going, I don't know what all the fuss is about. We just didn't take it seriously, really. We didn't really view it as like, oh yeah, this is, I don't know why we didn't take it seriously. Maybe we were young and stupid or something. I think that's probably.
I mean, that's completely fine.
That's kind of what it was, really. I think no. But I think it's also to do with the fact with Andrew as well and I've always based my entire career on the teachings that I learned from Andrew Weatherall. And I think, Andrew did say in an album, in an interview once that, what would be on your gravestone? And he said, well, it'll probably be classic underachiever, because it's like I had the potential to do so much, but I didn't do it, And I don't know if that's kind of rubbed off on me, but it was like when the Sabres started to blow up, what you have to bear in mind is prior to that, Andrew also, he did Screamadelica. All of a sudden he was the biggest producer in the world, and he shunned it. Right. He turned his back on it and he moved away from that. And then it was like, I'm not doing that. I want to do something else. So we started to do the Sabres of Paradise, and then the Sabres of Paradise started to really blow up. And he's like, okay. And he kind of shied away from the limelight. And then after the Sabres, he went on to Two Lone Swordsmen. And when that started to start big, he was like, okay, I'm gonna move. He preferred to kind of hide away in the background. He didn't really want to be a superstar DJ, even though he was. He didn't play the game. He was kind of, he was a bit of an enigma like that. And I think that's probably, what's made him so mythical now as well, in certain circles. And so we didn't take it seriously. We went, okay, we're done. Let's move on, and gone. And we were done, and that was it. And so we didn't take it seriously. We didn't really value ourselves as much as we should have done. There was too much of Andrew Weatherall in all of us, where we just went, yeah, let's move on to other things now. That's done its thing. And it's only since Andrew passed that the amount of love and that has been shown to anything that Andrew did and towards the Sabres of Paradise, that we kind of made it viable for us to do what we needed to do this time round, and it kind of stems from us doing this kind of interview where we went up to the Golden Lion in Todmorden in 2023 for the 30th anniversary of Sabersonic, and it was to mark the 30th anniversary there, where we went up to do a Q&A. And when we went to do the Q&A with the Flight Path Estate guys, who were kind of like the oracle on everything to do with Andrew Weatherall, and one of the guys, Rob Fletcher, used to run a club called Herbal Tea Party in Manchester, went, hey, do you mind if you go on, before you go on stage, if I play a live recording of you from when you played my club in 1994 before you went on tour with Primal Scream? It's like the warm-up show. I was like, oh, no problem, Rob. Yeah, definitely. So before we went on stage to do the Q&A, the table's set and the chairs are set and the drinks are on stage, and, they were getting it already, and they're playing this live recording. And I was listening to it going, wow, hold on, we were actually a really, really good live band, because we never
pretty good, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, damn, we were right. And so we kind of, I said to Gary, I said, this is us, it sounds great. And he went, yeah, it does. So I got Rob Fletcher to send me the recording, and I listened to it, and then I forwarded it to a couple of friends. I sent it to like the guys from Primal Scream, and Andrew got back to me and went, oh my God, you lot were a really good band. And I was like, yeah. So that's what kind of spurred me to actually get on and do this time round, because I was like,
yeah.
Oh, we weren't absolutely horrific and rubbish, and therefore it kind of came together quite nicely this time round. So that was the connecting block that was the springboard for us to do what we did now.
Yeah, awesome. So are there shows planned for 2026? Is there more stuff coming?
There are shows planned for, we're going to Athens to play with. There's a few other festivals that have been announced that are looking really good. But there will be other things, there's the potential of releasing like a box set anthology type of thing, where we're going to get the rarities, the B-sides, the peel sessions, the, demos, live recordings from the rehearsal studio, and one of the live recordings from one of the shows, and do that as well. There's the potential of an unreleased album that we found of songs that had never came out, and it's got Bobby Gillespie singing on one of them, and Little Annie from On New Sound. So there's potential of that, but time is running out from my point of view, because I want to kind of try and wrap this all up by the end of 2026, because this is not something that I'm going to be doing forever. We've come back, we're going to do some shows, we're going to release the albums and the anthology, and then try and finish it by the end of next year, and then I'll kind of get my life back after that as well. So
in true Sabres of Paradise style, right? As soon as it gets massive,
we're gone.
Because step away immediately. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's we will. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty certain if it runs into 2027, it'll only be for a few months, but we are looking to ride off into the sunset at the end of 2026, basically.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I'm very much hoping to catch one of the shows next year. I've been catching up with it as prep for this episode of the podcast, and I'm very, very excited to see it. 'Cause, I mean, like you say, you're actually pretty good, aren't you?
We're not bad. I've surprised myself by actually going, wow, we were right. But yeah, no, it's the gigs have gone great. The response has been amazing. Everybody's loved what we've done so far. So we're going to definitely do some more next year. So yeah, hopefully we'll get to catch you at one of those, mate.
Awesome. So yeah, just last question, or last, little kind of topic of discussion.
Sure.
How do you feel about dance music in massive quotation marks and as a, slightly amorphous concept today? What's exciting you, if anything, of new stuff? Well, how do you feel about the scene, how it's sort of developed over this kind of this is an enormous question, I realize, but what are your general thoughts on this?
Well, it's, the scene has more. I mean, it's huge now. If you think about it, we were just having that conversation of 1989 and 1990, you'd go to a club and you would hear, I'd term it hard house now. You'd hear acid tracks and you'd hear hard house and you hear, uplifting house and you'd hear garage and it was the night would have loads of tunes from all subgenres of house and dance music, and now it's not fragmented. It's just that it's become so big that you can go to a night and it will just be techno, and you can go to another night.
Yeah, specialized, right?
So it's just all specialized, and subgenres have now got such a following that in themselves they have tens of thousands of people who will turn up to an event just on that kind of thing. So from that point of view, I love the fact that dance music is now just so huge that it proliferates through all aspects of life. It's like you get ads on the TV and it's just people pretending to be a DJs because DJs are really cool now. Or, it's cool to be a DJ, or it's cool to kind of play music, and it's cool to kind of be involved in music. It's a bit of a contradiction in terms because music has now been kind of demonetized and devalued to the point where it's pretty much kind of worthless. But to be associated with it, it's still really cool. You get, everybody wants to be a DJ, or everybody wants to be a producer. Everybody wants to make beats, and everybody wants to kind of, there's a glamour associated with it, which is, which rightly so, it is cool, and it's brilliant. But why then is this kind of, on one side, it's really cool and it's brilliant to do that. But on the other side, it's like, well, you're going to get all money for it, really, because we've demonetized it to the point where everything's free or cheap or nothing. And when you do demonetize it to that point, it's a throwaway commodity. It's no longer as valued, And as a matter of fact, we had this thing earlier this year where we took all the Sabres of Paradise music off Spotify for various reasons. The shitty money that they pay out, their investment in war, which just goes against every fiber of being a musician or a creative. It's like, well, I don't want my money going towards machines that kill people, and so we kind of moved away from that. And the thing is, since doing that, I felt really good because one of the things I've now done, and I was guilty of it as well. You get that kind of the link, you Shazam a tune and you get the link and it goes straight to Spotify and you find it and it's like, oh, great, I've listened to it. Now I'm so engaged with Bandcamp, I'm buying a lot more music. I'm absorbing a lot more music. It's not so throwaway now. I take it, I kind of slipped into that kind of thing whereas you get instant gratification just by being out, Shazamming something. Spotify finds it. It takes you to Spotify. You play it. There you go. Done. Now I'm like, no, I'm going to go to Bandcamp. I'm going to go and buy the tune because I respect what that artist has done. And not only do I feel good about it, I'm actually like listening to more music. I'm getting forwarded more interesting things. I'm checking out more stuff. I'm listening to the radio more. I don't know. It's not so throwaway now. So the way dance music is now, I love the fact that it's all, everybody's into dance music and it has taken over the world as well. But the thing that troubles me on it now is the fact that, it doesn't seem to have that kind of, it's more of it's a background thing. It's not really, it doesn't seem to be something where everybody's like, unified on it from the point of view, let's look after each other, let's support each other. It's become more of a dog eat dog world out there, and that probably goes against the whole fundamental basis and reason that dance music was what it was, because we all came together irrespective of our sexuality, our color of our skin, or whatever we were all united on that. And now there seems to be divisions in that. There seems to be infighting, and that goes against the whole second summer of love that I was really digging. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Is that element, do you think, an inevitable result of it just becoming high profile and just bigger, just more people coming into it?
Yeah, probably, probably is, absolutely, because it's just like, you're kind of now in a world where, to get the attention for, come and listen to my song is like, you've got to play the game of social media and you've got to try and hype it up. And
it's almost like the most boring thing you can ask someone now, isn't it? It's like, because there's just so much, and there's so many, and like, listen to my music is almost like, it's just like the last question you want to hear, or the last thing you want to hear from someone.
Yeah.
But actually it's the most important thing, right? Or it should be.
Well, I mean, this is it. And that's kind of why, okay, so when if I found a song on Shazam and it took me to Spotify, and I listened to it on Spotify, it would recommend a couple of things. Oh, go and listen to this. And the recommendations it was just recommendations they were putting up of people who weren't really like what you've just listened to. It's what certain algorithms were pushing towards you, whereas Bandcamp and them sort of places, it was like, well, you listened to that, you bought that, that person's now got a new song out, or they've now got, these people who are part of that label are releasing something, do you want to check that out? And it kind of makes a bit more sense. It doesn't seem to be this random algorithm throwing you stuff that doesn't have anything to do with what you listen to, but it's what Spotify are pushing you towards listening. And so I don't know, I just find it really strange that, we're in this world now where, music is devalued, and we're at this point now where there's so much good music out there that it's really hard for that good music to kind of be found as easy as it used to be. But, you just have to go searching for it, I suppose.
I mean, there's no alternative to that, is there really? You got to do the work, go out and find it, do the digging,
Yeah.
That's the reality.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Listen, Jagz, this has been awesome. Glad we finally did it. This has been a long time in the works, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been hard to, synchronize, but I'm glad we finally got there. It's been great fun.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, mate.
Music, not diving, with Scuba.